Hot yet? Good morning. I want to welcome everybody this morning once again. As usual, we are in our Sunday morning Bible class. We're plodding through the Gospel of Matthew slowly but surely. We've been in chapter 23 for a few weeks now, and we are still there. That's where we're going to jump in today. And just rewind and review for a minute to set the stage for you so you remember what's going on. Jesus has come into Jerusalem, made a big fanfare, made a big show of coming in on the foal of a donkey to put them in the mindset that he is coming in and making a claim to be king. He comes in and goes straight into the temple, into the heart of religious leadership, and begins again to make a stink, turning over tables, causing problems. Then he comes back the next day, and all the religious leaders grill him. They all have different questions for him. They all have different things that they're asking him, and he answers all their questions, silences them, and then he moves into laying out these woes. That's where we are in chapter 23. And woe is just a statement of grief. It hurts my heart for you. It makes me sad for you. It's not as much an accusation, although there are accusations within them, as it is he is grieving over them. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because a lot of times we come into this and we make it really black and white. There's good guys and bad guys. And Jesus is the good guy and the Pharisees are the bad guys. And that's not the way Jesus is looking at it. Jesus looks at the Pharisees as religious leaders. And the problem is his frustration with them, his grief over them, is that they're not doing what they're called to do. They are called to be those who hold Israel to a higher standard. They are called to be the ones who teach Israel to follow the paths that God has laid out for them, and instead they get bogged down in their own junk and their own rules and regs and all this stuff, and that's really one of the things that frustrates Jesus the most. Picking it up in chapter 23, chapter 23, verse 29 is where we were. We're in one of the last of the woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs for the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous. And you say, if we'd been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourself that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the guilt of your fathers, you snakes, you offspring of vipers. How will you escape the sentence of hell? It's pretty rough. He goes right at them. And again, he says, you guys build monuments to these prophets. You guys build all these, and then you stand there and say, if we would have been alive then, we wouldn't have killed the prophets, because we're better than those who went before us. We're more enlightened. We're somehow smarter. And Jesus says, in saying that, you're only indicting yourself, that you are the descendants of those who destroyed the prophets, who killed the prophets that were sent to them. And so I think one of our first questions I want to talk about this morning is how do we do the same thing? Remember, I told you it's real easy for us to look at these and go, yeah, Jesus, you give it to them. But we are in the same seat as the Pharisees in this passage. We have access to the scriptures. We have the ability to read for ourselves and to teach others. We have the discernment that the Holy Spirit has given us. We are in the same position as the Pharisees, and I think we have to look at this as pointing at us. And so, how could this be applicable to us? Do we do anything similar to this? How do we do something similar to this, or do we not? I'm opening it up. So, Cody, we don't practice what we preach. The very definition of hypocrite. Elaborate on that a little bit. We're in here and we're focused on the scripture when we're in here, and when we walk away, we leave it here. Is basically what Cody's saying, and okay, that's true. That's one of the definitions of hypocrisy. And if you talk to people outside of the church, one of the big criticisms of Christianity as a whole, Jerry. Absolutely. Jesus said, go teach the gospel to all nations, and sometimes we fall way short on doing that. Sometimes we fall way short of teaching the gospel to our neighbors. And you know, we're not teaching the gospel to anybody, but absolutely. Jason.
We tell others not to sin, but then we sin ourselves.
Oh, tell others not to sin, but then we sin ourselves. And I think I would go further and say we judge others' sins, because, I mean, there's nobody who's going to stand up here and preach to you who's perfect. You'll never hear me claim that Jeff is righteous or holy or anything. I'm a sinner just like everybody else. And so anybody who stands up here and claims anything different, they're walking in that path of the Pharisees, where you'll hear most of the time when I'm preaching, I try to say we and us, because I don't want to be the guy up there going you, because that's ridiculous. We're all in this together, and we're all sinful, and we're all messing up. I think it's when we get into the idea that, you know, I'm gonna tell you how you're sinful. I mean, it's the very thing Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount. You know, he makes a joke out of it, but you're busy picking a piece of sawdust out of your neighbor's eye when you got a log sticking out of your own. And you know, maybe you should worry about yourself before you worry about everybody else. I have a different iPad today because I left mine at somewhere else, and so I'm not. You don't care. Verse 34. Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. So, I'm going to send you prophets. I'm going to send you teachers, and you're going to do to them the same thing that you said you weren't going to do that your fathers did and you wouldn't do. And there's a little bit of interesting Bible nerd stuff in here I'll give you real quick, and you may care, you may not. But Zechariah, Jesus states that Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, was murdered between the temple and the altar. And one of the common criticisms you'll get from people who have some learning is that this is a biblical contradiction. They'll say that 2 Chronicles reveals that Zechariah was the son of Jehoiada and was stoned in the court of the house of the Lord. And so Jesus is contradicting, because that's not that Jehoiada and Berechiah are two different people, and it's a stupid. It's a ridiculous argument, because yes, it is two different people. That's the point. The Zechariah in 2 Chronicles is different than the Zechariah the prophet. They're not the same person, and you know, we identify by last names, and so you may have Jeff Dunn and you may have Jeff Dunham. You know, one's a puppeteer and one's a preacher, and they're different people because they have different names, even though they have the same first name. Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, and Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, are different people because that's their last name. You with me on that? You may not ever think about this ever again, and that's okay. But I just felt like it was necessary to throw in there in case you ever come across it. So there's one other piece of Bible nerd stuff that you need to look at, because this may come up, it may not, as we wrap up chapter 23 and move into 24. If you've been paying attention, you might have noticed something missing. Most of your Bibles do not have verse 14. Now you're all checking. It's okay. Check. Most of your Bibles do not have verse 14. The King James Version and some other translations will have 8 woes. Most modern translations will only have 7 woes because they leave out verse 14. In verse 14, the scribes and the Pharisees are condemned for taking advantage of widows and making lengthy prayers. Now, that is reflected in Mark 12:40 and Luke 47, but it is not in the oldest manuscripts that are available for Matthew. That verse is not in the oldest manuscripts available for Matthew. Now, why is there a discrepancy? Well, King James Version was translated in the 1600s. As you can imagine, there's been some things happen since the 1600s. Archaeologists have found a lot more stuff and a lot more resources. And so King James was a translation of a translation of a translation. His translators were translating from the Latin rather than original Hebrew or Greek or even Aramaic, depending on what. And since then, there have been older manuscripts found than what they had to work with. Does that make sense? And so it doesn't mean that it's a bad translation. It's a great translation for its time. Problem is, that was a long, long time ago, and there's a lot changed since then, and we know a lot more now than we did then. And so most of your modern translations are going to leave out verse 14 because it is absent in most of the earlier manuscripts that we have available. Again, you don't care, but that's okay. Some of you do, and that's fine. I get to talk about this because I have the microphone. The other thing, I want to discuss just a minute, because Jesus makes 2 references here, and we don't talk about this a lot today in churches, and maybe that's just my experience. Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but Jesus references hell a couple of times. And you know, he tells them, you go across land and sea to make a proselyte, and you bring him back and make him twice the son of hell that you are. And then in one of the passages that we just read, he says, you snakes, you offspring of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? And we've talked about this a little bit before, but I want to hit it on it again. The actual Greek word here is Gehenna. Gehenna is another one of those things that you've heard me talk about before. When the translators don't know how to translate a word, they just leave it in there. And rather than translate it, they just take the Greek letters and insert English letters and make a new word. Gehenna is not a translation. It is a transliteration, where we took a Greek word and we shoved English letters into it and made it into an English word. Gehenna literally means the valley of Hinnom. And so if you go to Israel, Jerusalem is not actually on a hill, but it will appear to be on a hill because it's surrounded by valleys. One of those valleys is the valley of Hinnom, and you can go back, especially in Jeremiah, and read through there. You'll find the valley of Hinnom is one of the places where the Baal and Asherah worship really got big, where the worship of Moloch really got big, and they erected altars there and were sacrificing their children, burning them on altars. And God calls them out for this through prophets, says, this is what's going to happen. There's another army that's going to come in, and they're going to take you over, and they're going to burn your bodies in the valley of Hinnom. And that's actually what happens. And so it will be renamed Topheth, the valley of slaughter. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. Jesus is referencing a place of punishment, but not really punishment as much as it is a place of consequence. And that's important for us to understand, because one of the common things you'll get from people who are struggling with some form of belief is, how can a loving God send people to hell? And how do you answer that? Well, a loving God does not send anybody to hell. We send ourselves to hell because we choose something else over God. And God is not going to force you to be with him. And if you choose this other thing, whatever it is, and you choose to turn your back on God, then you end up where you end up. And you end up in a place that is separated from God. God is love. And every good gift that we have is a direct result of God's presence in our lives. So think about a place where all those things are not. That's hell. Our translators translated hell, but really it's just a reference to one of the worst places that you can be. So there's that. So let's talk just for a second now. So Jesus tackles the religious leaders and says, look, this is where you're messing up. This is what grieves me about you. This is what hurts my heart about you. So my question here, and you know, I may regret this, but story of my life. If Jesus were here today, what woes would he pronounce on Christianity, the followers of Christ? If he were to show up today, now remember, this is what hurts my heart, not accusations, but some of them would be very similar. We just talked about it. Cody said, you know, we're hypocrites. We get in here and we talk about Scripture, and then we go out and we live a totally different life. And that's basically his argument against the Pharisees. You're actors. You're wearing a mask. That's what a hypocrite is. It's an actor. And so you're playing a role. And so you pretend to be one way, but you're actually something else. So we can start out there. Ernie, you had your hand up. He would be sad to see that we worship God, but we're split apart into a variety of churches. I agree, because the followers of Christ are now so separated into factions, and we spend just as much time, or if not more, arguing with each other than we do trying to advance the kingdom. Cody? We'll uphold the law higher than him. Unpack that a little bit, because I think I know what you're saying, but I want to put words in your mouth. Basically, one of the things he blasts the Pharisees for is that you struggle over your tithe, you know, the mint, and you'll count out your mint leaves and how many mint leaves you're going to give to God, but you're neglecting the weightier matters. And what does he call the weightier matters? Mercy, justice, and righteousness. And basically what Cody's saying. We'll sit in here and quibble over whether, I don't know, whatever, it's something minuscule, you know, whether a Christian can go to prom. And we'll have a big argument over whether or not Christians can dance. And meanwhile, there is, you know, we're missing the bigger picture. Tony Campolo is a famous preacher, and he once spoke at the Southern Baptist Convention. And he got up and very famously said, there's a world outside of these walls that's going to hell, and we don't give a damn. And then he sat there, and you can imagine how that went over. And he said, and the sad part is that some of y'all are more upset that I said damn from the pulpit than that I said there's a world going to hell. Kind of right. We'll quibble over little bitty things, but we're missing the big picture. Jesus doesn't say choose one or the other. He says you shouldn't have neglected the former. You should have done, I don't know, latter and former I always get messed up, but you should have done both, is what he says. Jason, you had your hand up.
Piggybacking off of what everyone just said, but to put it in simpler terms, the way we judge one another. The way, you know, Methodists like to judge Baptists.
Okay. the way we judge one another as Christians, the way we look down on one another, or we nitpick one another, or we accuse one another. I buy all that because that's, again, part of that division that we've been talking about. Anything else? Oh, Robin. Yes, absolutely. Strain out a gnat and swallow a camel, just what we're talking about. You worry so much about the little bitty things that you're ending up missing the bigger picture. Absolutely. Evan. Ooh. Okay. To repeat for those of you at home and those who over here couldn't hear, there was a poll that came out this weekend and said something to the effect of 51% of people polled would be patriotic, but only 31. Is that what you said? 31% would be considered religious, and that's obviously would be a big woe. It hurts my heart that you would that you would choose your nationality over your Christianity. Again, you don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to choose one or the other. You should lift up both. Jason? Yeah, absolutely. And you know, there's nothing wrong with being patriotic, but when it's one or the other. All right, let's move on because we could do this for a long time, but I think you really see Jesus' heart in this last section of chapter 23, starting at verse 37. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Jesus says, he's really expressing his love for Jerusalem, for these people. Even though you kill the prophets, even though you stone those who were sent to you, I just want to gather you up and protect you. I just want to gather you up like a hen gathers her chicks up under her wings. But you won't let me. And so now your house is going to end up being desolate. You're going to be left to your own devices. And so you really see Jesus' heart there. This is not him coming in saying, y'all are all going to hell. This is him coming in saying, I want to save you, but you won't let me. I want to help you, but you won't let me. And I know what's coming for you. I know what's going to happen to you, and you don't know it's coming. But it's coming, and I wish I could protect you from it. It's like a parent, you know. You see your kid doing something stupid, and you know it's going to end up hurting them. But sometimes you have to let them because that's the way they learn. Not that it's going to kill them, but you know what I mean. My parents, of course, had to do that with me a lot because you could tell me all day, but I learned a lot more from hurting myself than I ever did from being told. So some of us are hard-headed like that and stubborn, and it takes us a while to learn. Now flip over into chapter 24, because now we're going to get into some deep water right as I don't have a lot of time. So there's no way we're going to finish this today, but let's jump in. Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to its building. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Every one will be thrown down. So they get through with all this stuff. He's given this big sermon. He's given this big lecture. He's answered all the questions. He's given this all the 7 woes and this impassioned speech. And they walk out. And now remember, his little group of disciples, this country boy has come to town. You know, it's like taking little 20-year-old Jeff to New York City. He'd be walking around with his mouth open all the time. Oh, man, look at all these buildings. Man, alive. Jesus, you see these buildings? Look at this. Isn't that cool? I mean, they're just gawking. And they're like, Jesus, you see that? Look at the size of those stones, man. That's something else. And Jesus says, you see all these things? There's not one stone going to be left on top of another. And that shuts them up. Look at the passage. That shuts them up. They walk all the way from the temple to the Mount of Olives. Now, I don't know. They may have been talking about something. They may have mumbled among themselves. But the Bible doesn't record that they asked Jesus anything else. That shuts them up. And so I'm sure there's a little whispering going on, you know. What did you hear what he said? What? You know, I mean, I'm sure that's happening, but the Bible doesn't record it. They get to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus sits down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, this is one of those passages, right? This is one of those passages that has made all kind of people go all kind of crazy and say all kind of different things, and you can go and find 100 different interpretations of Matthew 24. So, having said that, there will be a lot of different takes on this passage. There are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me who are going to tell you totally different things than what I'm going to say. I'm giving you what I believe from my understanding and my study. And so take that with a grain of salt. This is one of those things that, somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong. It doesn't really matter a bit for your salvation. But it's one of those things that Bible nerds love to talk about. If you remember, you'll get a lot of the, not a lot, but some of the Calvinism election theology comes out of this passage. Some of the rapture left behind theology comes out of this passage. A lot of people make a lot of proclamations and guesses and statements about the end of days based on this passage. And so you'll get a lot of stuff. You'll get a lot of, you can think about all the things you've heard about rapture and end of days and what's the world going to look like and the world coming to an end. And just off the top of my head, I remember as a kid hearing that Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist because all three of his names, Ronald Wilson Reagan, had 6 letters. And so that was 666, the number of the beast. It was the end of days. Y'all, some of y'all are old enough to remember that. Some of you are like, what are you talking about? Who was Ronald Reagan? I'm not kidding y'all. I can tell you this because she's not here and won't get embarrassed. This last week we were moving Esther into a different place, and we're unpacking boxes, and Olivia unpacks a box, and she pulls out a cassette tape, and she goes, Dad, what is this? It cracked me up. I was like, honey, in ancient times, people used to listen to music. I remember Olivia's first birthday party was May 21st, 2011, 1 year old, right? Now, anybody remember anything about that? There was a dude, a preacher, pastor, prophet, whatever you want to call him, who predicted that Jesus was coming back on May 21st, 2011. You remember that? He had billboards. He bought billboards, May 21st, 2011. Jesus is coming back. And we planned a birthday party for that day. And a lot of my friends were like, well, what are you going to do if Jesus comes back? Like this, what if this dude's right? I said, I guess I'll ask him if he wants some cake. I don't know. But yeah, the point is, we get all kind of craziness, and this passage is one of those. The Bible nerd term for this is called eschatology. All that is a big fancy word that means studying things that relate to the end of time. the final things. Jesus, this is one of those things that gets way out of control. And I'll admit that in my younger years, I went through a phase where I was obsessed with all this stuff. And you know, you're doing all the number stuff, and they're doing all the, and anybody who's been a Bible nerd for any length of time went through that phase. Where you're all obsessed with the end of days and the rapture and all this stuff. But as I've learned and grown and studied, I don't think that's all that's happening here. You have to understand Jewish poetry, specifically Jewish apocalyptic poetry. Remember, we've said from the moment he got on that donkey and came into Jerusalem, Jesus has placed himself in the position of a Jewish prophet. Specifically, he's referenced Isaiah a whole bunch. He's also referenced Jeremiah. He's also going to reference Daniel and all of those prophets. And so if you read through those prophets, they would say things in an apocalyptic manner. And a lot of times it's like the nearsighted and farsighted, okay? He'll be talking about something that's close up, and then he'll shift and be talking about something that's far off. You see me take off my glasses sometimes because I'm supposed to have bifocals, but I'm too stubborn to get them. And so I'm nearsighted. I can read this fine, but I can't tell you what that screen back there says. So I have to put my glasses on when I'm going to drive or see anything down the road. But I say that to say sometimes that's the way Jewish apocalyptic poetry is. There's what's now and what's happening, and then there's what will happen. And the prophet, specifically Jesus in this case, can shift back and forth, and you have to pay attention. Now, he's answering two specific questions here. What questions is he answering? Number one, we just read it. The disciples ask him, go back to Matthew 24. The disciples ask him, when will all these things happen? Is the first question. When will all these things happen? And what's the second question? What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, there's a couple of things about these two questions we've got to get. First of all, what are they asking? When will these things happen? What are these things? Not one stone will be left on top of another. What he just said. Okay? You with me? Not one stone will be left on top of another. That's what he just said. He went to the mountain, he sat down, and they said, well, when will these things happen? That's these things. Okay? That's question number one. Question number two, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now, we're thinking way down the road. They're not thinking that. What are they thinking of? Yeah, the Messiah. When are you going to ride in and run the Germans out? When are you going to come in and do the kingly thing that we're expecting you to do? Okay? And so you got to get what's being asked here, because Jesus is going to take that and he's going to go in a different direction. So when are these things going to happen? This is the temple is the center of everything. Is that going to be next week? Is it going to be next month? Is it going to be in a few years? And then what's the sign that we can know you're coming, when the end of the age will come? But in their minds, these two questions are totally related. The fall of Jerusalem and the end of the age. Now, the end of the age is what we would say the end of the era, right? They're not talking about the end of the world. They're not asking about the end of the world. They're not asking about Armageddon. They're asking about, when will the end of this age, the age of Roman occupation, when is this going to happen? When will you come and drive out the occupiers? All right, you with me on this? Two questions. And so, now I got to pull it back up. Cody, go. You had something to say, and I'm going to let you say it while I look this up.
Yes, sir. I was just going to relate to what Jesus is telling them. He's telling them, don't worry about the end of time. You need to worry that these buildings aren't going to be idolized, because the ones that's going to be in these buildings, they're going to try to
Absolutely. That there's there's a lot of things going to happen. There's lots of stuff going to happen. Look at the end of verse 4. See that no one, and Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alone, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Let's stop right there. One of Jesus' favorite metaphors is rebirth, right? Go back all the way through all his teaching. You must be what? Born again. It's rebirth. He's also going to talk now about nearsighted and farsighted, the fall of Jerusalem and the end of the age. He's talking about both and. Does that make sense? They're thinking, when are you going to drive the Romans out? He says, look, there's going to be a bunch of stuff happen. There's going to be wars. There's going to be rumors of wars. You're going to have kingdom rise up against kingdom. You're going to have nation rise up against nation. There's going to be false prophets that come and claim to be the Christ. And all these things are going to happen. And this is just the Braxton Hicks. You with me? All the women got that joke. Men, Braxton Hicks is the little fake contractions. Right, ladies? It's not contractions, but it feels like contractions. I am not up here claiming to understand. Women, don't throw rocks at me. I say all the time, there's a reason God made the women have the babies, because one man would have had one baby somewhere. The rest of us would have heard about it, and that would have been the end of the species. We'd have been like, nope, I ain't doing that. Anyway, here we go. That there are going to be lots of false leaders, false messiahs, false teachers. There's going to be all these kind of things, and that's not the end. That is just the beginning of the birth pains. And now, then let's pick it back up, verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death. And you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many to stray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and then Matthew inserts a little parenthesis here, let the reader understand. You get what Matthew said, you know what I mean? You get what I'm saying? Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So he's going to reference Daniel. He's referencing a phrase used in Daniel 3 different times. Daniel 9, Daniel 11, and Daniel 12. I'm going to read you these. If you want to make a note of them, go back, check them on your own. The first is Daniel 9:27. And it says, he'll make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and offering, and the abomination of desolation will be on a wing of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. And you're like, wait, what? Daniel 11:31. Forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Daniel 12:11. From the time that the regular sacrifice is abolished and the abomination of desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. Now, this is where you get into all the speculation and all the stuff. When he says the abomination of desolation, this is a passage that is referenced mostly in Daniel. It is referenced a little bit in Isaiah. But both times it's referring to a foreign king coming in and desecrating Jerusalem, desecrating the temple. It's referring to a Gentile king coming in and taking over. In Isaiah, it's the Assyrian king. In Daniel, it's the Babylonian king. And Jesus is taking that motif and transferring it over. And he's comparing Jerusalem to Babylon. Jerusalem is the new Babylon. Now this is, remember, he just got through with all these woes. He's expressing how it hurts his heart that Jerusalem, the city on a hill, the city of Zion, is supposed to be this beacon to the rest of the world as to what followers of Yahweh can look like. Instead, it's become a Babylon. It's become a city that defiles people, a city that takes advantage of people, a city, and so he's using that motif. And they would have gotten this because they went to Jewish Sunday school and they got all this training. And so when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you'll know the desolation is near. He's going to use all this apocalyptic imagery, and he's not talking now about the fall of Babylon in 539 BC. He's now talking about the fall of Jerusalem. He's going to say at the end that this is going to happen. He's shifting back and forth, right? Glasses, nearsighted, farsighted. He's talking about the fall of Jerusalem. He's talking about the end of the age. He's talking about the fall of Jerusalem. He's talking about the end of the age. He's going to end and say this is all going to happen within one generation. Now remember, in the Bible, what is one generation? Anybody? You know there's going to be a test. One generation. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for one generation. One generation died. How long? 40 years. Jesus says this is going to happen within this generation. Now you know how long it is until the temple's desecrated by the Romans? 37 years. Wow, it's almost like he knew what he was talking about. 37 years later, the Romans are going to come in. The Romans are going to burn Jerusalem. The Romans are going to destroy the temple. And then they're going to offer on the temple altar sacrifices to their Roman gods. That is the abomination of desolation. It is when they desecrate the altar of God. That's what the Babylonian king did. That's what the Assyrians did. That they're going to desecrate the temple of God by offering sacrifices to these idols, to these foreign gods. You with me on this? I know we're getting crazy, but bear with me. We're going to make this make sense. And we're going to do it in 4 minutes. He goes back and is again going to quote Isaiah 13. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon won't give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky. See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day. This is what Isaiah, See, the day of the Lord is coming, a cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. He's quoting from Isaiah 13, the depiction of the fall of Babylon. He's still, once again, comparing Jerusalem with Babylon. He's using this apocalyptic prophetic language, but he's talking about that this is what's going to happen you're going to see this in your lifetime. This is going to happen to you. And part of the reasons that he's weeping over Jerusalem is because he knows this is coming. This is what's going to happen to you. And so then how does he answer the second question? I love this, because how does he answer the second question? The second question is, what will be the sign of your coming? How will we know when it's the end of the age? And you know what Jesus says? I don't know. That's what he says. Jesus says, I don't know. Nobody knows the day and the hour. Not even the angels. Only your Father. Jesus says, I don't know. And nobody knows. And anybody who tells you they do know is probably lying. The reason I felt safe having a birthday party on May 21st is because no man knows the day and the hour. And so I'm pretty sure I was safe that day. Now, Jesus could come the day before or the day after, but no man knows the day and the hour. So this dude putting up billboards, I was pretty sure that day was safe. That day was much safer than the 20th or the 22nd, because nobody predicted those days. No man knows the day and the hour. So when I hear somebody saying, oh, it's going to happen on this day, well, all right, we can make plans for that day, because no man knows the day or the hour. Jesus says, look, I don't know. It's going to happen when God tells me. When God says, let's go, I'm going to go. And that's how I'm going to know. I don't know, and you're not going to know. He's going to use a bunch of language about the flood, and once again, he's channeling Isaiah. Isaiah also uses the language of the flood in Isaiah 54. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to read that. If you want to look that up, Isaiah 54, 9 and 10, he uses the language of the flood to talk about God's judgment. But Jesus is going to say, just like the flood happened, everybody, all these people were eating and drinking. They were having birthday parties. They were having family reunions. They were doing all these things, and they didn't. And it came, and it's going to be the same way, because you're going to be doing what you're doing. You're going to be going about your daily life, and it's going to happen. Nobody's going to know. And so anybody who tells you they know is confused. Yeah, we got to stop. Because now we get into Daniel and visions and stars and stuff, and so we're close. We got further than I expected to be honest. All right, so read Matthew 24. That's your assignment for the week, and let that just kind of explode your mind a little bit. And then we'll come back in here next week and we'll finish out with what Jesus is saying about the end of the age. Thanks for your participation today. Sorry I preached too much. My kids will tell you it doesn't take much. You got about 15 minutes to take care of your business, hug somebody's neck, shake a hand, make everybody feel welcome. Come back in here at 10 o'clock for worship.